When a platonic or romantic relationship is established with Sun and Neptune, it's one that feels like magic. Well, at least at the beginning. If it's a romantic relationship, you might expect something a bit like a romance in a Hallmark movie. A relationship that makes life before that person seem somewhat dull. And now it's full of color. It is a relationship where you lose the boundaries between self and partner. It can have the feeling of a deep spiritual connection from the get-go. There might be a bit of confusion as to who is who and what is what in such relationships.
Welcome to Inspirit Astrology, everyone. I'm Vera.
And I'm Etienne.
For the Sun-Neptune conjunction square opposition, we would give a small orb of about 5 degrees, strongest felt from 0 to 3 degrees. And remember, if someone's Neptune is aspecting your Sun, it is likely that everyone born within a couple of years will have that aspect with you. How the two partners work together does not depend solely on that Sun-Neptune aspect, but other connections between the luminaries and the inner planets as well.
So the sun in astrology generally represents things like the ego, the sense of self, the life force and vitality, your will to live, along with your dharma or sense of purpose. It can represent figures of authority and leaders. Most positively, it expresses as those who live aligned with their purpose and provide the light, the warmth, and even the resources to support themselves and others around them. Alternatively, and negatively expressing sun can be somewhat domineering or lacks the positive qualities that the sun represents.
Neptune, on the other hand, is the illusionist, master of magical tricks, someone who seems to represent everything a person has ever dreamed of. But it also represents murky characters, people with addictions, or deceptive characteristics. The most positive expressions are people who are highly spiritual or dedicate themselves to selfless service.
Yeah, so the combination of the two brings great sensitivity, but also potential weakness in the rapport. There is enthusiasm, a lot of it happens in the mind, and the imagination plays a huge role. This relationship can make you crave the other person like a drug. Often this is accompanied by, self-deception or moodiness, and there can be distraction or retreat from the world and false perceptions of perfection. This can, however, provide important processes of change and growth in the topics that the planets represent for each individual. But this is only if the dynamic is really handled carefully and with sufficient degrees of realism maintained.
So, who is the Sun tune Neptune? As always, it depends on Neptune's house and natal aspects as well. But it is light, vitality, and the essence of the Sun captivates Neptune. They might find themselves drawn to the Sun person's temperament or how they look. And the Sun reveals to Neptune the best version of who they can become. So Neptune seeing their best self reflected and highlighted by the Sun's light. They might seem to embody authority and honor, perhaps standing out as exemplary in some area of life, and they might be appear so a source of warmth, joy, and inspiration. Um, in a more negative scenario, the sun can look like someone easy to be led into questionable and dubious affairs that are not in its own interested. So they might look like someone who is easy to be misled, deceived, or seduced. And the sun person may appear overly self-interested or rigid as well. There might be the sense that they need to be in charge, and Neptune runs the risk of feeling victimized or is drawn to self-sacrificing behaviors to fit the sun's mode.
Okay, so who is Neptune to the sun then? Well, often they embody an ideal of the sun person. It might seem like a romantic ideal, an ideal husband, or an ideal friend. They look perfect in the eyes of the sun, seen through a lens of hope, fantasy, and aspirations, at least for a while. there can be a mystery or enigma that needs to be solved, someone who intrigues and perplexes them, who they see only through a fog of some kind. And, that kind of fog can express itself differently. It can be through illusions, or it can be through self-deception, or, you know, even a deliberate deception on part of Neptune, or more simple ones like meeting in a virtual reality space online, or just coming from very different backgrounds. It could also be someone who encourages them to be and behave in a more inspired manner. So there's a mysterious, mystic, vague, somewhat puzzling or enigmatic person could really be embodying an affinity with the spiritual realms as well. So this can mean someone who understands them and shows great compassion for them. But, this just might not be to the same extent as one's imagination is letting them have on. So it can also be a challenge to hidden insecurities, having to face parts of the self that one might have had illusions about or have been avoiding about. And really, more negatively, it's just a disappointing person, a deceiver, someone who is untrustworthy or unreliable.
So how does the Sun experience the encounter? The Sun is quite enchanted by Neptune, and this often involves a deep sense of admiration, fascinations, or awe. This can manifest in various ways. For example, finding the other person beautiful. They might be captivated by the other person's charisma or grace, and every gesture or glance might seem special. And they're drawn to their inside beauty as well. To charm, wit, kindness, or just unique qualities that hold an attraction. And the connection may feel quite unique in this way, resulting in the Sun finding itself under a spell, and the experience of being with the other person might feel transformative, as though they bring a spark or magic or joy into their everyday life.
Yeah, in a positive relationship, the Sun really gets this invitation, or sometimes a challenge to develop its spiritual side. And this can happen through feeling inspired and motivated by the other person, as though this other person elevates their thoughts and makes them really see things differently. Neptune can share insights that expand a perspective and lead to the seeking of deeper understanding. This can also manifest as an encounter which invites the Sun to dissolve existing structures in their life and their own identity, or, just cultivate new dimensions of, creative potential and awareness. There can be feelings of kindness, compassion, and invitation that really are what allow the Sun to really move forward and live its own truth and express it freely.
However, with hard aspects, the more often developments are those in a more difficult, negative relationship, or sometimes they come just at a later stage of certain relationships, and those are feelings of disappointment, a breaking down of the perfect image created, and what is left behind is mostly painful reality. And this often carries a weight of unmet expectations and broken trust. And often it is the sense of silent letdown that is creeping in, the gap between what was hoped for and what was actually delivered, widening every day. And sometimes the Sun feels they have lost something they can't fully grasp the extent of, as there can be a sense of having lost their purpose, their direction, or sense of who they are. And while this can be managed in a way that helps the Sun to change, it is undeniably a difficult experience and process to go through.
So, how does Neptune experience this encounter? Well, they often find themselves as magicians on a stage under the spotlight. As such, they are likely to experience a complex mix of states, depending highly on the natal placement of Neptune. And generally, the the natal chart, which reflects their general personality, is important to know how this is going to impact them. And there are other synastry points that will have a strong influence. And, what is the significance that they contribute to the relationship will be determined by those. Regardless, there's going to be a certain excitement as the thrill of performing can be invigorating. If the sun is reacting positively to their efforts to create their magic, then there's a certain accumulation of excitement and energy. Neptune could feel that they get recognition for their selflessness, their spiritual endeavor, or their creative potentials.
This leads Neptune to feel drawn to embodying their spiritual sides, desire to be of service to the sun, and others being emphasized. And the challenge can come with Neptune being wrapped up in being the ideal and feeling the need to hide the parts of themselves which aren't perfect. And along with the unsustainability of neglecting the darker side of who we are, this can lead to further fears or anxieties that the sun could manage to see through those efforts.
So we get on to certain dynamics that can develop. There's often, a certain idealization on one or even both sides of this interaction, and an overlay of a perfect mental image on top of the naturally imperfect, messy, normal human personality. With all the life experience that they do bring to the interaction. Seeing the best in someone is of course is great, but if people are put on a pedestal of infallibility, the only sure thing is they will at some point fall from grace. In this relationship, it's hard to keep both feet on the ground and perceive the more difficult and harsh potentials that each and every human interaction brings. It's highly advisable that all relationships having a heavy Neptune involvement really maintain an effort to connect with the real world, be pragmatic, and in the form of paying attention to what people, that matter to you around you, what they say about the relationship can be really helpful and important. And keep an eye out for any red flags that you notice because they should be taken seriously.
And also be wary of putting unrealistic expectations on your partner, as this as well is highly likely. Remember, it is difficult to remove those rose-colored glasses. However, they are also the spring of strong romantic feelings, which can have their allure. Of course, in a more positive scenario, there is a huge amount of inspiration for personal development in different areas of life. It might feel like the life essence is being watered and its different colorful sides might be shown to that person and later to the world. The imagination might be very active and produce different beautiful results in the process. In more spiritual connections, there is the possibility to feel connected to each other on a deeply intuitive, almost telepathic connection, where you feel the moods and sensations of the other person very strongly. So, this allows for compassion and empathy to grow. Yeah, there might be a sense of deep care for the other person, but on occasions for the sun, it might be at a cost, sacrificing their own vitality or straying from their own path to be of support.
So, in a Sun Neptune relationship, one is often prone to seeing the best possible version of the other person. This often leads to falling in love with an image and wanting to do what is necessary to help the other get there and achieve their best self. And this is one of the reasons for the sacrifice dynamics mentioned. But one important thing to remember is that, you know, as much as we want to help people, there are some things that other people they have to do for themselves. So this can sometimes, backfire a little bit. So it's good to be supportive, but yeah, sometimes being too involved can have its downside.
And when mentioning sacrifice, it is also possible that especially the Sun loses their sense of identity in the midst of being involved with Neptune's magic. For both, there is the possibility of codependency and all the dynamics that come out of that. It is one of those relationships where you lose track of time, and if taken out of the situation, might feel like someone woke you up from a dream.
Yeah, and indeed, even if the dream is beautiful, it brings a tendency to avoid confronting the practical side to life. Some might even avoid the responsibility that the relationship itself brings, but this will be more dependent on the natal charts. However, for many, this relationship seems like a safe haven where they can escape from the outside world and even their own inner processes. It's always advisable to confront the problems one has and really look for balance between the magic and the reality. And with hard aspects, this can often be quite difficult.
But for many, it is also a place of confusion, not knowing clearly where they stand and why exactly they stand there where they stand in the relationship. And lack of clarity might come in the form of mixed signals, indecision, or just not knowing or respecting each other's limits and boundaries. So, a Neptunian partner might prove to be an elusive or an inconsistent partner as well.
Now, it's important to remember with sacrificing behaviors that, you know, there can really even be a selfish motive to sacrifice because one who sacrifices themselves is often trying to validate themselves in some way. So that's a bit of the murky kind of undertone that can be, yeah, that's affecting one's instinct to sacrifice. So that's something to be aware of when we have a lot of Neptune going on in a relationship.
And also, it is often a problem related to self-worth. So people who have low self-worth might be more prone to sacrifice to just make themselves feel worthy enough for the other person. So it's important to have a stable sense of self-worth and just work on your self-worth so you can counter that dynamic.
Yeah, and so what is the ending? What are the kind of after effects of this relationship? Well, the great magic is often connected to a great disappointment. But of course, it is possible, even if less likely, for positive expression to prevail. The thing is, there are no sudden endings to Neptune relationships. Often there's an accumulation of small disappointments that lead to silent pain over time. It takes quite a bit to arrive at the recognition that the relationship is not the best for the parties involved. And even then, it might be somewhat difficult to really let go and release the magic or the hopes of it thereof.
It is also often related to experiences of mutual pain. The person who causes the disappointment might be weighted down by guilt or regret, creating a loop of emotional pain. Both sides feel the loss of something precious, whether it's trust, admiration, or shared happiness. And both parties might have found themselves weakened to a point in the relationship where they feel somewhat incapable of acting and breaking the cycle of illusion and promises, followed by disappointment. So the relationship can also create sufficient confusion or purpose that living is difficult because one cannot see clearly what they would do without it.
Yes, and going blindly into the world is it's always a challenge and requires a great amount of willpower to really make it happen. So more often than not, the natural process prevails, and though it takes time, waking up does eventually happen. Relationships like that often need a grieving period, as not only the relationship itself is being released, but also the ideal of what could have been. One remains quite vulnerable after that, and the breaking of an illusion does leave someone feeling exposed. Even if this is painful at the beginning, it can be used to develop more empathy, with the rest of the world and even foster a new level of self-acceptance.
And the process of letting go of illusions has great benefits from both a spiritual and worldly angle. And once the process is complete, the individuals, particularly the Sun, might find that the erosion of self that had been undergone during this relationship has helped them to leave behind other elements of their identity which don't serve them in the long run. So Neptune might have left with a greater sense of the self-defeating or victim tendency they have, along with the personal illusions they might have been perpetuating.
Yeah, and identifying them really gives the opportunity to work on them in the future that is before them. This dissolution of elements of self will also likely necessitate a rebuilding of certain fundamental elements of identity. This could be things like self-confidence and also those personal passions, which might have been, lost or neglected during the relationship.
Long term, relationships with high Neptune involvement really offer happiness. It is always a mixture of the dynamics described, but if a lot of awareness is practiced, it is possible that on the shared journey, they share practices or philosophies that resonate deeply, offering each other tools and insights that help connect with the more spiritual, elevated side of life.
Yeah, so be warned though, if awareness isn't being practiced and actively cultivated, then many unconscious tendencies can take hold with unhealthy dynamics beginning to dominate the relationship. For those who have a bit of a codependent streak, this might be emphasized in the relationship and be especially mindful of those tendencies.
To help things to last and continue in a healthy, balanced manner, it can be very useful for couples with strong Neptunian placements to seek external help, as the illusions and the fog can be hard to pierce through together. Various forms of counseling may help by allowing someone who isn't under Neptune's spell to see things from a more objective standpoint and relay important informations to the people in the relationship. In the end of the day, synastry is always a balance of many factors, and this aspect can be a piece of the puzzle that does fit. So, the sacrificing of egoic impulses, embracing spiritual devotion, or even the elimination of self-defeating tendencies can all serve as ingredients that do make a particular relationship work.
Now, it is also possible that we see this aspect happening in other relationships, such as friends and family. So when it comes to friendships, we see, a lot of the similar themes come up, but fortunately, the intensity is somewhat diminished, and there can be more benefits enjoyed, but also, the sense of disappointment can come in regardless. A key to friendships is often understanding what is reasonable to expect from the other person. This judgment can be impacted, leading to one's expectations maybe not being met. Negative traits like deception can still come up, so be aware of that. And it is perhaps not a friendship that one, should depend heavily on, but it may shed light on important aspects of yourself and help you to, practice selflessness. The key is always in balance and finding the healthy level of proximity and dependence in any of life's varied relationships.
For the Sun, this friend might help to dissolve certain obsolete parts of the ego and open them to a more deeper spiritual connection with who they consider themselves to be. Neptune can also have their spiritual side energized by this interaction. When it comes to parent-child relationships, Neptune's tendency towards selflessness and unconditional love can be a real benefit, as this is one of the few kinds of relationships where it is most healthily expressed. We can look at a few of the possibilities as what might come up, though.
Yeah, so if the parent is Neptune and the child is the Sun, there's a risk that the parent could be neglectful of certain aspects that are important to the child. Now, this is not necessarily through any malice, but just a lack of awareness or understanding of the needs of the child. It can also benefit the parent, strengthening the impulse to make necessary sacrifices for the child. Generally, it's good to watch for either end of the extremes here, though. It's good so long as it's kept within that healthy balance. Even overindulging a child is unlikely to produce beneficial results for either one. So interference from the parent can also make it more difficult for the child to understand their path in life.
The other way around, Neptune child, Sun parent. The parent is able to cultivate compassion and spiritual outlooks in the child's life. Unfortunately, this might come as a result of the parent over prioritizing themselves over the needs of the child. And there could be a sense that the child is dissolving the sense of identity that the parent formerly had, which is a normal part of the process of parenthood, but hard aspects could indicate this is a more difficult experience. This can also mean the parent must face the more mischievous or deceptive side of the child, and manipulation is a natural process in any child's development, and this parent likely needs to be a bit more attentive to these patterns to support healthy corrective measures by not giving in to any of those behaviors.
So we hope that what we have shared has given you some perspective and helpful information to navigate the vast ocean in the best ways possible. We're also here to help. If you need a more in-depth analysis of your situation, you can book a reading with us on our website.
Thanks for watching.